Sander, thank you so much for being on the show. Very much appreciated. Why don't we take a quick second to tell folks a little bit about your, career background and how did you get into product marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here, Jorge. Um, I'm a product marketer with a little bit over 10 years of experience in marketing. I started out in the advertising industry at an ad agency in London where I was running ad campaigns. I moved to the Bay Area after about 3 years of working in advertising. And I started to work at B2B SaaS companies. I've been at a few B2B SaaS companies right now, and I've done a variety of marketing roles. I started out in field marketing at Zendesk. I did sales enablement at Segment. I started out in demand generation at Trey. And ultimately, in the last few years, I've been building my product marketing skills. I made that transition at Trey and was an early PMM at Rudderstack. Um, but yeah, I've been, in terms of PMMs and product marketing, it's a role that is very broad and it could mean a lot of
Yep.
things, different organizations and companies. I've always been very close to sales and have had uh, a lot of experience in sales enablement. That comes from my time at Segment, where I was in the sales enablement team. But I've kind of had that as like I don't know if it's my strong suit, but it's definitely something that I've had a lot of experience in.
Well, let's dive into sales enablement. You've had a lot of experience there. By the way, you've had like a plethora of different roles, which I think is fantastic because to your point, like that product marketer really seems to sit, within the kind of intersection of a lot of different functions. And so I think, those marketers that have a fantastic experience from a lot of different perspectives within the go to market function, I think are just better at understanding what needs to happen, but also be able to relate to those different functions. And I think alignment seems to be a big topic of discussion constantly, but specifically around product marketing, just given all the stakeholders they have to
Yeah,
interface with, right?
absolutely.
Well, let's double click into sales enablement. At a high level, just given your experience, how do product marketers support with sales enablement?
Yeah. So, in the context of sales led B2B companies, and, like that's kind of where I'm coming from. That's the world or the roles that I've been a part of. Um, Helping the sales team is one of the key responsibilities for product marketers. And it might even be the most important relationship. Um, so I follow Dave Kellogg, who is this marketing thought leader who has this blog, and he writes about that relationship between marketing and sales. He writes this story about a boss who once told him that marketing exists to make sales easier. So, that's he kind of like oversimplifies it, but it's such a great line. And it really resonates with me. Your job as a marketer is to help the sales team and to make their job easier. So, in terms of sales enablement, that it's essentially that it's helping the sales team sell the product to buyers. So I think that's kind of um the goal, the objective. Then the question is, okay, that sounds good. How do you actually do that? And it usually comes in a few different forms. What is most traditional, or like the output of that role, is usually assets. Um, but there could be lots of different assets, you know. There could be one pagers, there could be customer stories, uh, there could be presentations, it could be internal facing material like battle cards. I think of all of those things as assets that it's basically helping the sales team sell the product in a better, more efficient way.
Hmm. And if you were to kind of think about, specific assets or collateral, or items that you would create for sales that you'd say are kind of the most important. And I ask this because, boy, I haven't spoken to a product marketer who was not just overwhelmed with requests and different functions that they have to focus on. And so when they do kind of start to hone in on sales enablement and supporting the creation of those kinds of assets, they tend to have to prioritize. So what would you say are those most important kind of low hanging fruit?
Yeah. This is I I don't want to say it depends because everything depends. But let me just explain a little bit why it depends. It depends really on the stage of the buyer journey. And there's what I mean by that is there's different assets that can help the different stages of the journey. And if you consider, or if you think of the typical SaaS product for enterprises, it's a journey that could take months. There could be a buying committee. There's, lots of stakeholders, and there's a lot of steps in that journey. So before a prospect is, before a meeting is even set, before a prospect is talking to the AE or the SDR, they're probably doing research on your website, on user review sites. They're talking to to their own network. And so if they land on your website and they want to, read more about your product, perhaps the most important asset um, in that stage is, a one pager about your company or about your product. So they might, give their email, their name, their title, maybe their phone number to, download an asset that is relevant to them. So that is an important asset because it kind of helps get to that next step.
Mhm.
The next step would be a meeting. And let's say it's a meeting with an AE. Let's skip like the SDR qualification step. In the meeting with the AE, I would say the most important asset in that meeting is the pitch deck. The pitch deck is the presentation that sets the context for of the company and the product. It's usually a few slides, and it kind of it tells a very crisp story. The AE should be, telling a very crisp story about the problem and how the company and the product solves that problem and that challenge. So that is, one key asset for that specific part of the journey, which is that first meeting. After that first meeting, the pitch deck is not as, relevant. It might be shared, but for that specific step, that is the most important. I'll take it one more step. So once you've done that first meeting, the prospect is, um, he or she is interested. They want to continue the conversation. Um, the next step in that process is for that prospect to basically sell the product internally. Like, hey, I think this new tool, this new solution is worth it. I think we should buy it. That person needs to sell it internally, and there are assets that help that champion or that prospect sell internally. It could be another one pager. I think another important asset in that step is customer stories. So Customer stories, serve as social proof of um, of the product, and it could be like those stories and perhaps different one pagers um, serve as collateral that the champion will use to sell the product internally. So there's different assets that are important in different stages of that journey, and it depends. Like it might depend if you're looking at, okay, where are we having a challenge, or where are we having difficulty, in which part of our funnel, and then you want to say, okay, we're not getting to like that final decision or that purchase decision. Like, okay, we need to focus on that stage, and we need to create assets specifically for that stage in the buyer journey, in that process.
Boy, I love that. I mean, you just sort of touched on a lot of the things that we've been thinking about, here at Asset Mule. So I very much appreciate that. You talked about that first piece, like that one pager. It's interesting because that's a one pager that then is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is handed over to demand gen, or or that marketing function that's
Yeah.
setting up the white papers and the
Yeah.
downloads with all those sort of things, right? So that's one use case, very top of the funnel kind of scenario. But then you also talked about that one pager that is potentially that's further down the funnel. What would be, I guess, some of the unique distinctions between those two?
So the one pager that would be, let's call it the first touch, um, is probably going to focus on the main value props of the product. And it's usually something like, I mean, it should be also on your website. Your homepage should have those main value props, but it might be as a PDF, so it can be shared, in an email, and so people can share it in Slack or wherever they want to share it if they don't want to share that website. Um, when it's at the a later a later touch, or further down the funnel, it's more specific to the buyer. And what that could mean, let's say the buyer is in a specific industry, they're in the healthcare industry. It would be great if you had a one pager that is specific to that industry, the healthcare industry, because it speaks to their problems and their challenges. So you may have that on your website. You may have like a healthcare page, but if you don't, it would be great to have that also for the sales team, to have that one pager and send it to that prospect, because it's much more relevant to their problems and their challenges. It doesn't have to be industry specific. It could be, a one pager for enterprises. So companies could have different targets, an SMB target or an SMB segment, then a commercial or mid market segment, and then an enterprise um, segment. And if you have a one pager for that enterprise buyer, that would be more specific to their needs. So it really depends on, like, you get more specific when you're thinking about those assets that are uh, at further down the funnel.
Well, let's talk a little bit about any tips that you would have around like eliminating blockers, right? When it comes to actually getting these, one pagers or these assets developed and designed. As we've talked to a plethora of stakeholders within the PMM role, there's always this sort of like, discussion around, boy, we get the copy, and we'll collaborate with these various stakeholders, but then we send it over to design and gets stuck there for weeks. I've heard months. I've experienced months before. So that's
Yeah.
on like kind of the creation side, but then also on the sales side, being able to like pull in those insights that are constantly evolving. How have you worked around those blockers or challenges?
So I think the first thing I'll say is it's important to have the content pretty much done and dusted before you send it over to the design team. I think the design team hates when you need to fix like one typo or one word or like one thing. It creates more work for them. Um, so yeah, you need to have the content. This is how I've worked in the past, right? With design and creating these assets. You really want to have the content pretty much final before you include design because their time is super valuable. They're working on a lot of things. It takes a while for them to, uh, to produce these assets. So you kind of want to have everything ready for them to go. In terms of creating the assets, I'm really big in working together on a lot of these. Not for everything, but on a lot of these, it's important to have if it's a sales asset, I would include someone from the sales team in perhaps not the creation, but in terms of like the iteration. Like these assets aren't just like, okay, I'm going to write this one thing and it's done. It's kind of a iterative process. You create a draft, you get feedback, you write another draft, or you create a version 2, you get more feedback, and it at some point you'll say, okay, this is good enough, let's ship it, let's send it to design, and then the asset is created. But once you involve um someone in sales and you get their perspective and their feedback, I think the asset just gets a lot better. And you'll see that if you do get someone who does provide good feedback, you will see that asset being used by more of the sales team, because really the point of the asset isn't just for it to just look pretty and not being used or read. You want the sales team to use it. You want them to send it to their prospects. You want the prospects to read it to get value out of it. So incorporating the feedback from someone in the sales team, I think, is crucial. Um, I'll say one thing about the design process. So once you have that like content ready, you send it over to design. I think it's also important to have a good relationship with the designer. Um, because it's also an iterative process. They come back with one thing, you're like, "Oh, I don't quite think that's right. Let's make this tweak, let's make this edit." So you want to have at least maybe one or two revisions with the designer uh, before you actually, ship it and it's used by the sales team and it's sent to prospects.
Well, you mentioned basically this customization. Of course, what we've been trying to, part of what we've been trying to solve here at Acid Meal, and personalization is such a big thing. And we've heard this story over and over again. It's like sales wants it more personalized, right? But I am a small product marketing team, and then I have to support this large team, sales team. But even larger product marketers or larger product marketing teams, I should say, still struggle, and correct me if I'm wrong here, with the idea that they have to now or be able to generate personalized, customized assets for each prospect. So you could imagine that becomes very difficult. How, first of all, is that something you've seen? And if so, how have you gotten around or maybe sort of built systems in the past to be able to allow for maybe some sort of like last mile personalization of an asset by sales, so they can kind of polish that last mile again, that those final pieces, without having to come back to you multiple
Yeah.
times.
Assets are tricky, and like I don't think I've quite seen um a tool that would let you do that. So I don't have a lot of experience in terms of, oh, we need this asset, but we need to like, change this or like make it more personal for this. Because once an asset is done, it's kind of like, okay, that took a long time,
Yeah.
and now we have to use it. Maybe there's a V2 or a V3, but it just takes a lot of time to create those assets. So you do want to have the asset as good as possible um, once you ship it to your teams. I will say though that, like, in terms of slides, with specifically Google Slides, but it could also be, PowerPoint or a different presentation software, it is easier to um, have more flexibility there. So, a sales rep could duplicate, a slide and then tweak it if you let them to. If you give them the appropriate guardrails, if you give them, the right logos, if you have some oversight on that template that you give them, it is easier to create, different slides that are more personalized. And I'm sure that some sales folks do that already, and they just, use what's given to them, and they create their own presentations and their own things. I think as a marketer, you kind of want to have some level of control. That's why I think, with Google Slides and using templates, it's kind of easy to do, and I've seen that being done at a few of the companies where I've worked, where there's like a template, you can copy it, you know where to put the logo, or you know what to change. Um, which, I think has worked specifically with slides. But if you're talking about one pagers, PDFs, I haven't quite seen that done.
Awesome. Sander, thank you so much for taking the time today to be on the show and, really bestowing your wisdom here around how PMMs could better support sales enablement. If folks wanted to connect with you on social media or maybe ping you for some advice or follow your content, what are the best channels to reach you?
Yeah, um I'm on LinkedIn, and I've been trying to post more and more content on LinkedIn about product marketing, about sales enablement. So feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. That's probably where you'll see a lot of relevant content about this. I'm also on Twitter. Um, my Twitter posts are not as professional or like about product marketing. I kind of, ramble about a lot of things: AI, ML, like, transportation. My Twitter feed is kind of a little bit all over the place, but feel free to follow me there as well if you want to see more.
Awesome. Well, have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks so much and talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you.